At a high-end Manhattan restaurant, what began as a quiet anniversary dinner turned into a devastating revelation. Jude Emerson, a man known for his calm composure, emotional depth, and years of steadfast love, was about to face his wife's ultimate betrayal. For 8 years, Jude had built a life around thoughtful gestures and quiet loyalty, never one for dramatics, always choosing patience. But nothing could have prepared him for this. Sienna arrived not just late, but accompanied. When she introduced the man beside her as a friend, Jude instantly sensed the lie beneath the surface. What he didn't realize was that the evening had been carefully planned, a calculated public embarrassment. Yet Jude didn't react, simply watched, listened, and chose silence over spectacle, setting the stage for the most poised act of retribution high society would ever see. Before we continue, drop where you're watching from, and if this story stirs something in you, hit that subscribe, because tomorrow, things go somewhere you won't expect. Jude had made the reservation for 7:30, but, as always, arrived early. He was habitually 20 minutes ahead of everything: dates, interviews, even his first meeting with Sienna. She used to joke about it, calling him aggressively punctual. Tonight he'd picked La Bernardine not because it was his favorite, but because months ago she'd casually admired it in a magazine. That's how Jude showed love in the things he remembered. He was seated by the window where the skyline shimmered like watercolor, and he ordered her favorite white wine and checked the time. She was running late. Not unusual for Manhattan on a Thursday. By 8:15, spotted her outside, radiant in the green dress he'd given her last spring. She was laughing with a man, tall, polished, charismatic. Jude's breath hitched. The two entered together. And the moment Sienna saw him, her expression shifted, polite but distant. "Jude," she said, "sorry we're late. Traffic was insane." This is Ezra," she added. "Ezra Fontaine. I've mentioned him." She hadn't. Jude would never forget a name like that. He rose to shake Ezra's hand. The man's grip was firm, his smile practiced. "Sienna said so much about you," Ezra said with ease. "Hope you don't mind me tagging along," she insisted. Sienna took the seat beside Ezra, not Jude. Their closeness said more than words ever could. Ezra talked and talked. About his luxury real estate ventures, his Tribeca project, his weekends in the Hamptons. Sienna laughed too loudly, leaned in too closely, left in a surreal, slow-moving nightmare. "What do you do, Jude?" Ezra asked, eventually slicing into his steak like a surgeon. "Accounting," Jude said. "Stable," Ezra nodded. The compliment was faintly veiled with disdain. "Though I've always believed in risk. It's where life happens. Don't you think?" Jude glanced at Sienna, who eagerly agreed. And in that moment, something clicked inside him. Not rage, not yet, but a sharp, unmistakable clarity. This was no celebration. It never was. It was a funeral. His marriage was already dead. He was just now seeing the body. When the check came, Ezra reached for it, but Jude was faster. "My treat," he said, pulling out his credit card. "After all, it's our anniversary." The words carried a weight that made Sienna flinch. For a moment, just a moment, he saw something like guilt flicker across her features. Then Ezra's hand touched her shoulder and she was gone again. They parted ways on the sidewalk. Ezra's car, a sleek black BMW, was waiting at the curb. Sienna kissed Jude's cheek goodbye, a perfunctory gesture that felt like a period at the end of a sentence. "I'll see you at home," she said, but her eyes were already following Ezra toward his car. Jude watched them drive away, his wife's laughter echoing through the partially open window. Then he turned and walked home alone, his footsteps echoing off the empty sidewalk. The city lights blurred past him, watercolor streaks against the darkness. When he reached their apartment, he sat in his chair by the window and waited. Sienna came home at 3 in the morning, her makeup smudged, her hair disheveled. She didn't explain where she'd been. She didn't apologize. She just went to bed. Jude stayed by the window until dawn, watching the city wake up. Somewhere in those quiet hours, he made a decision. He wouldn't shout. He wouldn't plead. He wouldn't beg. He would do something else entirely. The private investigator's office smelled like coffee and disappointment. Marcus Webb looked exactly like Central. Casting would order for the roll-graying hair, rumpled suit, eyes that had seen too much and believed too little. He listened to Jude's story without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "How long do you think this has been going on?" Webb asked, when Jude finished. "I don't know, months, maybe longer." Jude's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched in his lap. "I want to know everything. About him, about them, about what I'm dealing with." Webb quoted his fee more than Jude had expected, but less than his dignity was worth. "I'll need a retainer, and I'll need you to understand that sometimes the truth is messier than people want it to be." "I'm not looking for neat," Jude replied. "I'm looking for complete." 3 days later, Webb called. "We need to meet." They sat in a diner in Queens, far from anywhere Sienna might accidentally appear. Webb slid a manila folder across the sticky table. Ezra Fontaine, 34 years old, Princeton graduate, runs Fontaine Development. He inherited the company from his father 5 years ago. Net worth approximately $12 million.
Oh.
Jude opened the folder. Professional headshots, financial records, property listings. Then, on the third page, a photograph that made his stomach drop. Ezra and Sienna leaving a hotel in Midtown, her hand in his back pocket, his lips pressed against her ear. "There's more," Webb continued. "He's married. Wife's name is Delilah, corporate lawyer at Whitman and Associates. No kids. They live in a penthouse on the Upper East Side." "How long have they been married?" 6 years. But here's the interesting part. She's been asking questions, too. "What kind of questions?" "About her husband's schedule, his credit card statements, his phone records." Webb leaned back in. The booth. Either she's suspicious, or she already knows, and she's building a case. Jude stared at the photograph. Sienna looked radiant in it, more alive than she'd seemed in months. The woman in the picture was a stranger, someone who laughed at another man's jokes, who pressed her body against his in doorways, who came home at 3 a.m. with lies on her lips. "I want to contact her," he said suddenly. "The wife." Delilah Webb's eyebrows shot up. "That's not typically how these things work. Nothing about this is typical." Jude closed the folder. "Can you get me her contact information?" "I can, but I'm not sure it's a good idea." "Not." "What?" "Because once you cross that line, there's no going back. Right now, you're just a guy who suspects his wife is cheating. They contact the other spouse, and you're actively participating in the destruction of 2 marriages. Jude thought about Sienna's laugh echoing from Ezra's car, about the way she'd looked at him across the dinner table, not with love, not even with guilt, but with the kind of casual cruelty reserved for people who no longer mattered. "Both marriages are already destroyed," he said quietly. "I'm just deciding whether to let them burn down around us, or whether to walk away with some dignity intact."
What?
Webb studied him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Tears, rage, demands for revenge." Webb shook his head. "You're handling this like a chess player." "Maybe I am." The next morning, Jude sat in his office staring at Delilah Fontaine's business card. Webb had been thorough: office number, email address, even her assistant's name. All he had to do was pick up the phone. But first, he needed to understand what he was walking into. He spent his lunch break researching her online. Delilah Fontaine was impressive by any measure. Harvard Law, partner at one of the most prestigious firms in the city, featured in legal journals for her work on high-profile corporate cases. In every photograph, she looked composed, professional, untouchable. She was also beautiful in a way that suggested she'd never had to trade on her looks. Sharp cheekbones, intelligent eyes, the kind of understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted. If Ezra was cheating on her, he was an even bigger fool than Jude had imagined. That evening, Jude called Marco. "Let me get this straight," his best friend said after listening to the whole story.
Oh, yeah.
"Your wife is cheating on you with a married man, and instead of confronting her, you want to call his wife?" "Yes, and you think this is a good idea because... because she deserves to know. Because I'm tired of being the only one in the dark. Because..." Jude paused, searching for the right words. "Because maybe we can help each other." "Help each other what? Get revenge?"
Help each other get free?
Marco was quiet for a long moment. "You know what? I think you might be onto something. Promise me you'll be careful. This could blow up in your face. It already has. I just haven't hit the ground yet." The next morning, Jude composed an email to Delilah Fontaine. He wrote it 7 times. Deleting each draft, too harsh, too emotional, it's too much information, not enough. Finally, he settled on something simple. "Ms. Fontaine, my name is Jude Emerson. I believe we have something in common that we should discuss. Would you be available for coffee sometime this week? I promise I'm not trying to sell you anything or waste your time." This is important. Guards Jude, he included his phone number, and hit send before he could second-guess himself. She called 20 minutes later. "Mr. Emerson."
Dad.
Her voice was crisp, professional, but he could hear the curiosity underneath. "I got your email. What exactly do we have in common? Our spouses?" The silence stretched between them like a held breath. "I see," she said finally. "And you think we should meet because I have information I think you'd want to know? And because I suspect you might have information I need to know?" Another pause. Then, "Tomorrow. And there's a coffee shop called Grind on Lexington in 68th. Do you know it?" "I'll find it, Mr. Emerson. Come alone. And bring whatever evidence you have." The line went dead. Jude stared at his phone, his heart pounding. The pieces were moving now. Game had begun. Grind Coffee turned out to be one of those aggressively minimal places that charged $8 for a latte and made you feel guilty for wanting sugar. Jude arrived 15 minutes early, as always, and chose a table in the back corner where they could talk without being overheard. Delilah Fontaine walked in at exactly 11 o'clock. She was smaller than her photograph suggested. She commanded attention anyway, the kind of presence that made servers straighten their shoulders and other customers glance twice. She wore a charcoal wool coat and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Jude's monthly rent. She scanned the room, found him immediately, and approached with the measured stride of someone who billed by the hour. "Mr. Emerson." She extended her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing, too." Meet, she sat across from him, placing her briefcase on the floor and her phone face down on the table. Everything about her suggested control, but Jude noticed the way she gripped her coffee cup knuckles white, like she was holding on to something fragile. So she said, "What do we have in common?" Jude opened the folder Webb had given him and slid the photograph across the table. Delilah looked at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. "These were taken last Tuesday," she said, spreading out her own photographs. "And these on Thursday. These on Saturday afternoon when he told me he was playing golf. The images were devastating in their intimacy. Ezra and Sienna at a restaurant, holding hands across the table, entering a hotel together. Kissing in the back seat of his BMW. In one particularly cruel shot, Sienna was laughing at something he'd said, her head thrown back, her whole body alive with joy. "How long have you known?" Jude asked quietly. "About this one. 3 weeks. At the others, longer." Delilah's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. "He's not particularly careful. I think he assumes I'm too busy to notice. How many others?" "This is the 4th affair I've documented, probably the 7th or 8th overall." She gathered the photographs with practiced efficiency. "Seems surprised. I am. If you've known for so long, why haven't you left him?" Delilah's laugh was sharp. "Because I'm a lawyer, Mr. Emerson. I know how these things work. I know what I'd walk away with in a divorce, and I know what I'd lose. I've been building a case for 3 years. But now I'm tired." She met his eyes for the first time since sitting down. "I'm tired of pretending I don't know. I'm tired of sleeping next to someone who thinks I'm stupid. I'm tired of wasting my life on someone who doesn't value it." Jude understood. Exhaustion was familiar, the weight of carrying someone else's secrets, of being the only adult in the room, of loving someone who couldn't love you back. "What do you want to do about it?" he asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're both in the same boat. Our spouses are cheating on us with each other. We can handle this separately, file for divorce, split assets, move on with our lives, or we can handle it together." Delilah leaned back in her chair, studying him. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I don't know yet, but I know I'm tired of being the victim in this story. I know. I'm tired of them getting to write the ending while we sit around feeling sorry for ourselves. You want revenge? I want closure. I want dignity. I want them to understand that actions have consequences. Jude leaned forward. Want to throw a divorce party? A what? A divorce party. Invite everyone we know. We serve good food and good wine. We give speeches about moving on, about choosing ourselves, about refusing to let other people's selfishness define our worth. He was warming to the idea now, words coming faster. We celebrate the end of something that was making us miserable. We turn their betrayal into our liberation. Delilah was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup in small circles on the table. That's either brilliant or insane. Why can't it be both? She laughed. Real laugh this time, not the bitter edge from before. You know what? I like you, Jude Emerson. I like the way you think. Is that a yes? That's a let me think about it. She stood, pulling on her coat. But I will say this, whatever we do it right. No dramatics, no scene making, no stooping to their level. If we're going to end this, we end it with class. Agreed? And Jude? There's no going back.
Ow.
No last-minute reconciliations, no fighting for your marriage. We're done with them. Completely. Are you prepared for that? Jude thought about Sienna's laugh echoing from Ezra's car.
Oh.
About the way she'd looked right through him at dinner.
Oh.
About the stranger who'd been sharing his bed for months. Maybe years. I've been prepared for that longer than I realized, he said. Delilah nodded. I'll call you tomorrow. She left him sitting in the coffee shop, surrounded by the ghost of their conversation and the weight of what they were about to. Outside, the city moved at its usual breakneck pace, people rushing to meetings, to appointments, to lives that mattered to them. For the first time in months, Jude felt like he was moving too. Not backward into the past, not sideways into denial, but forward into something new, something that belonged entirely to him. He finished his coffee and walked out into the cold March air, already planning their next move. Delilah called the next morning at exactly 9 o'clock. No pleasantries, no small talk, just her crisp, professional voice, cutting through the phone like a scalpel. I've been thinking about your proposal, she said, and I have conditions. Jude set down his coffee cup. I'm listening. First, we do this properly. No amateur hour, no half measures. If we're throwing a divorce party, it's going to be an event people remember for the right reasons. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Agreed. Second, we control the narrative completely. No surprises, no improvisation, no letting emotion drive the decision-making. We plan every detail, anticipate every contingency, of course. Third, and this is non-negotiable, we invite them. Jude paused. Sienna and Ezra. Both of them together. We make it clear that they're welcome to attend our celebration of moving forward without them. Her voice carried a sharp satisfaction. Let them explain to their friends why they're at their spouse's divorce party. A slow smile spread across Jude's face. That's diabolical. That's lawyering. They agreed to meet that afternoon at Delilah's office. When Jude arrived, he was struck by how the space reflected its occupant's leak. Intimidating, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, awards lined one wall, diplomas another. Everything was positioned to remind visitors that they were in the presence of someone who won for a living. Sit, Delilah, said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. She'd traded her coat for a navy blazer that probably cost more than most people's cars. I've been making lists. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of logistics. Venue options, catering menus, guest lists, timeline planning. Delilah approached the divorce party with the same methodical precision she probably brought to corporate. Mergers, breaking down every element into manageable tasks. The venue is crucial, she said, tapping her pen against a legal pad. It needs to feel celebratory, but elegant. Festive without being tacky. What about the Foundry? Jude suggested. In Long Island City. I went to a charity gala there last year. Great views of Manhattan, industrial chic aesthetic. Delilah made a note. I'll call them. What about catering? Something upscale, but not pretentious. Food that makes a statement. Which is that we're not settling for scraps anymore. She looked up from her notepad, studying his face. You know, when I first got your email, I thought you might be some kind of stalker. Or at best, a broken man looking for someone to share his misery. And now? Now I think you might be the first person in years who actually gets it. She set down her pen. Do you know what the worst part of being cheated on is? It's not the betrayal itself. It's the way it makes you feel like a fool. For believing in something that was never real? Jude nodded. Like you've been playing a game where everyone knew the rules except you? Exactly. So now we changed the rules. They spent the rest of the week in intensive planning mode. Delilah secured the foundry for a Saturday evening 3 weeks out. Enough time to plan properly, not enough time to lose momentum. Jude handled the invitations, crafting language that was mysterious enough to generate curiosity, but clear enough to ensure attendance. Join us for an evening of celebration as we toast new beginnings and the courage to choose ourselves. Cocktails, dinner, and the kind of honesty that only comes with perfect clarity. Saturday, April 15th, 7 p.m. The Foundry, Long Island City. RSVP requested. The guest list was strategic. Mutual friends who'd watched both marriages from the sidelines. Family members who'd offered unsolicited advice about working things out. Colleagues who'd made small talk at office parties about the joys of marriage. People who needed to see what dignity looked like when it finally stood up for itself. Delilah asked during one of their planning sessions. It moved from her office to a wine bar in Soho, the conversation flowing more easily away from the formal conference room setting. I've been working on it. Jude pulled out a folded piece of paper. Want to hear the opening? Please. He cleared his throat. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate something that might seem unusual, the end of a marriage. Sometimes the end of something is the beginning of everything else. Sometimes you have to let go of who you thought you were supposed to be in order to become who you actually are. Delilah was quiet for a moment. That's beautiful and completely devastating. Good devastating or bad devastating? The kind that makes people examine their own lives. She sipped her wine. What about the practical stuff? Have you thought about how you're actually going to serve Sienna with divorce papers? After the party? I want her to have one last evening thinking she's in control of the situation. Ezra's getting his papers Monday morning, at his office, in front of his secretary. Delilah's smile was sharp as broken glass. I want him to remember that moment every time he walks into that building. 3 days before the party, Jude's phone rang. Sienna's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment his heart did something complicated in his chest. Old habits. Jude. Her voice sounded uncertain, smaller than usual. I got your invitation. What is this about? Exactly what it says. A celebration. A celebration of what? New beginnings. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting right now. Kept his voice level, friendly even. Will you be there? Yes, of course. But Jude, we should talk. About us. About where things stand. We will. Saturday night. Can't we talk before then? This feels so formal, so cold. A pause. I was going to say strange. Strange how? Like bringing your boyfriend to our anniversary dinner strange. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. She finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. How long have you known? Long enough. Jude, I can explain. Saturday, Sienna. Everything will be clear on Saturday, he said, then ended the call before she could reply. His hands trembled slightly. But it was a good kind of tremble, like waking up a part of himself he'd left unused for far too long that night. Marco showed up with Chinese takeout and a supportive shoulder. They sprawled on Jude's couch, passing around lo mein and swapping stories from emotional battlefields. You really sure about this? Marco asked, chewing on a mouthful of noodles. There's still time to just file for divorce like a regular person. Regular people don't get blindsided over dinner on their anniversary. Fair enough, Marco replied, setting his chopsticks aside. But do me a favor. What's that? Tell me this isn't just about payback. Tell me you're doing this to move on, not to get even. Jude paused, turning the question over in his mind. Was revenge part of it? Maybe a little. But beneath that, beneath the fantasy of seeing Sienna's expression when she realized just how wrong she'd been about him, was something else. Something stronger. It's like self-respect finally standing tall. I'm rewriting the ending, he said at last. I don't get to dictate how this story finishes. And how does your version end? With the good guys winning, not by tearing anyone else down, just by refusing to be torn apart. Marco gave a slow nod. That I can support. 2 days before the big night, Delilah called with an update. Ezra's getting suspicious, she said. He's been asking around, trying to sniff out what we're up to. And what did you say? Nothing too specific. Though I may have let it slip that I invited his business associates. You invited all of them? Every last one, including the ones he's courting for that new real estate venture. The ones whose funding he's banking on. Her laugh was laced with wicked pleasure. Let him try explaining to potential investors why his wife's throwing a divorce party. You're terrifying when you're this determined. Haven't seen anything yet. How are you holding up? Any second thoughts? Jude glanced around his place. Boxers lined the walls of his life with Sienna, neatly packed away. Tomorrow everything would shift. Tomorrow, he'd stop pretending he was part of something that had never truly been whole. I'm ready. He said and meant it. Good, because we're past the point of no return.
I already ordered the flowers. What kind?
White, lilies, for rebirth, and red roses. Roses? At a divorce party? Roses for bravery, Delilah said. We're going to need both.
Oh.
Meanwhile, Sienna wasn't sleeping. Jude could hear her at all hours pacing in the dark. Brewing coffee before dawn, staring out the window like she was searching for answers in the sunrise. The tension in her had shifted, no longer confident and composed, but fractured. She'd been trying to talk to him for days, hovering around the apartment, throwing out carefully casual questions that weren't casual at all. So this party, she asked Thursday morning, leaning against the counter while he buttered toast. Who exactly did you invite? Friends? Family? People who actually care? Care about us? No, about me. She flinched, visibly. Jude, can we just have a real conversation? This whole secretive thing, it's not you. Turned to face her fully, studying the woman he'd shared nearly a decade with. Somehow, she looked smaller, now like the facade was finally cracking. The bravado she'd flaunted at that anniversary dinner had faded, placed with something almost like fear. What do you want to talk about? He asked calmly. About whatever this is, about why you're being so... ... She waved her hands, grasping for words, so composed. Would you prefer if I weren't calm? I'd prefer if you were honest. The irony hung in the air between them like smoke. Jude buttered his toast slowly, methodically, letting the silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably. Completely honest, he said finally. I'm throwing a party to celebrate new beginnings. I've invited our friends and family. You're welcome to attend. And that's it. That's it. But it wasn't, and they both knew it. The apartment had become a chessboard, and every conversation was a carefully calculated move. Sienna was trying to figure out what he knew. Jude was content to let her wonder. Meanwhile, across town, Ezra was having his own crisis of confidence. She's not answering my calls, he told Sienna during one of their hastily arranged coffee meetings. Delilah's completely iced me out. She leaves for work before I wake up, comes home after I'm asleep. It's like living with a ghost. Sienna stirred her latte nervously. Maybe she's just busy. You said she was working on some big case. This isn't busy. This is strategic. Ezra's jaw was tight with frustration. And what's this party thing? About, did you know your husband was friends with my wife? Not friends. They can't be. Jude barely socializes with anyone except Marco. Then explain to me why they're apparently throwing some kind of joint celebration. Maybe. It's not joint. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Two people married to each other throwing parties on the same night at the same venue is not a coincidence, Sienna. She felt something cold settle in her stomach. Same venue? The Foundry? It's Saturday night. Delilah booked it weeks ago, and apparently your husband is co-hosting. Ezra leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. They know. They have to know. Know what? But even as she said it, Sienna understood how hollow the denial sounded. Don't play dumb. It doesn't suit you. That afternoon, Sienna called her sister Olivia. They met at their usual spot, a small cafe in the village where they'd been meeting for sister talk since college. I think I'm in trouble, Sienna said without preamble. Olivia looked up from her menu. What kind of trouble? The kind where? Your husband finds out you're having an affair and plans some elaborate public humiliation instead of just screaming at you like a normal person. Jesus, Sienna. Olivia set down her menu. You're really doing this? You're really cheating on Jude? Don't lecture me. Not lecturing. I'm just surprised. Jude's a good guy. Jude's a boring guy. There's a difference between boring and stable. There's a difference between quiet and empty. Olivia leaned forward. What the hell are you thinking? Thinking I'm married too young. I'm thinking I settled for safe when I should have held out for exciting. I'm thinking I deserve to feel alive. And this other man makes you feel alive. Ezra makes me feel like I matter, like I'm worth pursuing, worth risking something for. What's he risking? He's married too, right? That's not the point. That's exactly the point. He's not risking anything, Sienna. You are. You're risking your marriage, your reputation, your relationship with everyone who loves you. He's just having fun. Sienna's face flushed. Ain't you? Don't understand. You've never been married. You don't know what it's like to feel invisible in your own life. And you think humiliating Jude is going to make you visible. I think Jude stopped seeing me years ago. Olivia was quiet for a long moment. Has it occurred to you that maybe you stopped being worth seeing? The words hit like a physical blow. Sienna stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. Thanks for the support. Sienna, wait. But she was already walking away, her heels clicking against the tile floor like a countdown timer. That evening, Jude's phone rang. Olivia's name appeared on the screen. Hi, Olivia. Jude. I'm sorry to bother you. I had coffee with Sienna today. How is she? Confused, scared, and too proud to admit either. Olivia paused. I think she knows that you know. I imagine she does. She told me about the affair. I figured she might. Are you okay? It was such a simple question, but it caught him off guard. Most people had been asking if he was angry, if he was hurt, if he was planning revenge. No one had asked if he was okay. I think I will be, he said finally. Good, because honestly, you deserve better than what she's been giving you. Thank you for saying that. And Jude, whatever you're planning for Saturday night, I just want you to know that not everyone in her family thinks she's handling this well. After he hung up, Jude sat in the quiet of his living room, thinking about family loyalty and the courage it took to choose honesty over harmony. Olivia's call felt like a small gift-a reminder that he wasn't as alone in this as he'd thought. Meanwhile, in her penthouse apartment, Delilah was fielding a very different kind of call. Mrs. Fontaine, Mrs. Jenkins from Building Security. Your husband is here asking to speak with you, but you're on the do-and-admit list. Should I send him up? No, tell him I'm not available. He's quite insistent, ma'am. He says it's an emergency. Lila looked out her window at the city, lights twinkling below. Somewhere out there, Ezra was probably pacing the lobby, working himself into the kind of righteous indignation that had always served him so well. The same indignation he'd used to justify every selfish decision, every broken promise, every lie, Mr. Jenkins, she said calmly. If my husband has an emergency, he can dial 911. Otherwise, he can wait until Saturday like everyone else. Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Jenkins, if he becomes disruptive, please don't hesitate to call the police. I'm sure his business partners would be fascinated to read about it in the morning papers. She hung up and poured herself a glass of wine. 2 more days, and she could stop pretending that her marriage was anything other than a business arrangement that had outlived its usefulness. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jude. How are you holding up? Better than expected. She typed back, you same. Ready for this to be over? Ready for this to begin, you mean? Yes, that. Delilah smiled, setting down her phone. Tomorrow, she would pick up her dress, something elegant and celebratory, the kind of outfit you wore when you were finally ready to start living your real life. The Foundry had been transformed. what was usually an industrial event. Space now glowed with warm lighting and elegant arrangements of white lilies and red roses. Round tables draped in cream linen dotted the room, each centerpiece a small work of art. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the Manhattan skyline, the city lights twinkling like stars against the darkening sky. Jude arrived early, as always, wearing a navy suit he'd bought specifically for the occasion. Something about the evening felt ceremonial, like a graduation or an inauguration, a formal marking of before and after. "You clean up nice, Marco?" said, appearing at his elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to jump out of an airplane." "Good jump or bad jump?" "Good jump." "Definitely good jump." Delilah arrived precisely at 7, stunning in an emerald green dress that made her look like she belonged on magazine covers. She'd traded her usual severe professionalism for something softer, but no less powerful confidence. That came from finally standing in her own truth. "Showtime," she said, accepting a glass of champagne from the server. The guests began arriving in waves. Colleagues from both their offices, friends who'd attended dinner parties in both apartments, family members who'd sat through awkward holiday gatherings, the room filled with curious conversation and speculative glances, everyone trying to decode the mystery of what they'd been invited to witness. Olivia came alone, offering Jude a tentative hug. "I don't know what's happening tonight," she said quietly, "but for what it's worth, I think you're handling an impossible situation with more grace than most people would manage." "Thank you. That means more than you know." At 7:30, the room buzzed with a particular kind of energy that meant the guests of honor had arrived. Jude looked toward the entrance and saw them Sienna in a black cocktail dress that hugged her curves. Ezra beside her in an expensive suit that screamed corporate success. They both looked like they were walking into a trap, which Jude reflected was exactly what they were doing. "Breathe," Delilah murmured beside him. "Remember, we control this room." Sienna's eyes found him across the crowd. She looked pale, uncertain, nothing like the confident woman who'd brought her lover to their anniversary dinner. Ezra, meanwhile, was scanning the room with the calculating gaze of someone trying to assess potential damage to his reputation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jude said, moving to the small stage area the venue had provided. His voice carried easily across the room, trained by years of speaking up in meetings where louder voices tried to drown him out. "Thank you all for being here tonight." The conversations died down. All eyes turned toward him. "I know you're probably wondering why you're here. Some of you might be expecting an announcement about reconciliation or therapy or some grand gesture to save a marriage." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room, landing briefly on Sienna's stricken face. "That's not what this is." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Delilah stepped up beside him, her presence radiating calm authority. "This is a celebration," she continued seamlessly, "of the courage it takes to choose truth over comfort, to choose self-respect over familiarity, to choose the unknown over the unacceptable." Tonight, Jude added, "we're celebrating divorce." The word landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled guests. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "Did he just say divorce?" "Not the bitter, angry kind of divorce," Delilah clarified, her voice warm but firm. "The kind where you realize that loving someone means refusing to enable their worst impulses. Kind where you choose to honor what was good about your relationship by refusing to let it become something ugly." Ezra looked like he wanted to bolt for the exit. Sienna appeared frozen in place, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. "We want to thank you all for being here to witness this moment," Jude continued, "because endings, when they're done right, deserve witnesses. They deserve acknowledgement. They deserve to be marked with the same ceremony and intention as beginnings." The room was dead silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving, caught up in the unexpected drama unfolding. "So please," Delilah said, raising her champagne glass, "join us in toasting the end of 2 marriages that taught us everything we needed to know about what we won't accept anymore." The pause stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Marco raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said loudly. One by one, Other glasses rose. Olivia, Delilah's business partner, Jude's colleagues, family members who'd watched both couples struggle and wondered when someone would finally be brave enough to call it what it was. To new beginnings, the room echoed. Sienna set down her untouched champagne and walked quickly toward the exit. Ezra followed, his face flushed with embarrassment and what looked like genuine panic. The sound of their heels on the concrete floor echoed like a retreat. "And now," Jude said, watching them disappear into the night, "let's eat some excellent food and talk about the future." The tension in the room broke like a fever. Conversations resumed, but they were different. No more honest, more immediate. People were looking at each other like they were seeing something new, something they hadn't expected. "The bravest thing I've ever seen," Marco said, appearing at Jude's side, "or the most insane. Why can't it be both?" Delilah was surrounded by a small crowd of her colleagues, fielding questions about the legal implications of such a public declaration. She handled each query with professional grace, but Jude caught her eye across the room and saw something he hadn't seen before: relief. Pure, undiluted relief. The dinner was exceptional. Conversation flowed freely, lubricated by good wine and the kind of honesty that only comes when people stop pretending everything is fine. By the time dessert was served, the evening felt less like a funeral and more like a liberation. At 10 o'clock, as guests began to filter out into the night, Olivia approached Jude one last time. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "For what? For not saying something sooner? For letting you think you were alone and seeing how wrong this had become. You don't owe me anything. I do. But more than that, I owe myself the promise to be braver next time. To speak up when I see someone I care about being treated badly." After the last guest left, Jude and Delilah stood together on the venue's outdoor terrace, looking out over the East River toward Manhattan. The city sparkled in the distance, full of possibility. So Delilah said, "How does it feel to be officially divorced? We're not officially divorced yet." "The papers, how does it feel to be free?" Jude considered the question. "It feel like breathing after holding his breath for years. Like standing up straight after carrying something too heavy for too long. It feels like the beginning of something," he said finally. "Good something or scary something. Both. Definitely both." Delilah smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. "I think that's exactly how it should feel." The cleanup crew was already dismantling the party's remains when Jude's phone rang. Sienna's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail. But something told him this conversation needed to happen now. While the evening's clarity was still fresh in his mind, "Hello, Sienna? What the hell was that?" Her voice was raw, stripped of its usual calculated charm. "That performance you just put on? That was honesty. It was humiliation. You embarrassed me in front of everyone we know." Jude looked around the nearly empty venue, where Delilah was quietly settling the final details with the caterer. She caught his eye and mouthed, "You okay?" He nodded. "I embarrassed you," he said into the phone. "Sienna, you brought your lover to our anniversary dinner. You introduced him to me like I was supposed to smile and shake his hand and pretend everything was normal. That's different. How is it different?" The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller, more fragile than he'd heard in years. "Because I never meant for you to get hurt. But you knew I would be, I thought. I thought you'd understand eventually, that you'd see we weren't working anymore. So you decided to show me by parading your affair in public? It wasn't supposed to happen like that," Ezra insisted. "On coming? And I thought maybe if you saw us together, you'd realize." "Realize what?" "That I was already gone." The words hit him like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She had been gone emotionally, mentally, spiritually for longer than either of them had been willing to admit. "You're right," he said quietly. "You were already gone. I just refused to see it." "Jude, but that doesn't excuse how you handled it. Doesn't excuse bringing him into our life without warning, without conversation, without any consideration. For what it would do to me, I know. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Are you? Or are you sorry you got caught? Another silence. This one felt final, like a door closing. Both, she whispered. I'm sorry for both. Jude closed his eyes. The divorce papers will be filed Monday morning. Marco has the name of a good lawyer if you want representation. This doesn't have to be ugly, Sienna. We can handle this like adults. And then what? We just stop being us. We stopped being us a long time ago. Tonight was just making it official. After he hung up, Jude walked back inside to find Delilah sitting alone at one of the remaining tables. Her shoes kicked off under her chair, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. How did it go? She asked. Better than expected. More honest than we've been in years. He sat down across from her. What about you? Any word from Ezra? 3 missed calls and about a dozen texts, each one angrier than the last. She held up her phone. The latest one threatens to ruin me. Professionally, if I don't stop this insanity immediately. Charming. Oh, it gets better. Apparently, I'm a vindictive bitch who never understood what marriage was supposed to be. What was it supposed to be, according to him? Business arrangement where he gets to do whatever he wants and I get to look grateful for the privilege. Delilah's laugh was sharp but not bitter. You know what's funny? He's right about one thing. I never did understand what that kind of marriage was supposed to be. Thank God. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the crew fold chairs and pack away the remnants of their celebration. The evening felt surreal now, like something that had happened to other people. But the lightness in Jude's chest was real, undeniable. Can I ask you something? Delilah said. Do you feel guilty? About tonight, about the divorces, about any of it? Jude considered the question. I feel sad. I feel relieved. I feel like I should have done this years ago. He met her eyes. But guilty? No. I don't think I feel guilty anymore. Good, because we have nothing to feel guilty about. Even though we orchestrated the most public divorce announcement in Manhattan history, especially because of that. They wanted to make us look like fools. We turned it around. They wanted to control the narrative. We wrote our own ending. The venue manager approached their table, looking apologetic. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to finish closing up. They gathered their things: Delilah's briefcase, Jude's jacket, the small stack of business cards from people who'd approached them during the evening to express support or curiosity about their unconventional approach to ending a marriage. Outside, the April air was crisp but not cold. Spring was finally asserting itself after a brutal winter, and something about the freshness in the air felt prophetic. So, Delilah said, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders, what happens now? Now we go home. We file papers. We divide assets. We figure out how to be divorced people instead of married people. That's the practical stuff. What about the emotional stuff? I think the emotional stuff takes longer. Tonight felt like a good start. They walked toward the street where their respective cars were waiting. At the corner, Delilah stopped and turned to face him. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For showing me that there was another way to do this. For proving that you don't have to be a victim just because someone treats you like one. Thank you for trusting a stranger with something this important. You're not a stranger anymore. She kissed his cheek, a brief, warm gesture that felt like a promise of continued friendship, if nothing else. Then she was in her car, pulling away into the night, leaving Jude standing alone on the sidewalk. But he didn't feel alone. For the first time in months, possibly years, he felt like himself again, like someone worth knowing, worth respecting, worth choosing. He looked up at the Manhattan skyline, glittering with possibility, and smiled. Moving out of the apartment took 3 days and felt like excavating an archaeological site. 8 years of shared life packed into boxes and labeled with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd finally stopped being sentimental about artifacts from a relationship that had been over long before it officially ended. Jude found himself methodically sorting through the accumulated debris of their marriage books they'd bought together, but only he had read. Kitchen gadgets Sienna had insisted they needed but never used, photographs from trips where they'd already been growing apart but hadn't admitted it yet. Marco arrived on Sunday morning with coffee and a truck borrowed from his cousin. How are you holding up? He asked, surveying the half-packed living room. Better than expected. It's like putting away Christmas decorations, you know? You loved them while they were up, but by the time you're taking them down, you're ready. For the space to look different. It might be the healthiest metaphor for divorce I've ever heard. They worked in comfortable silence, wrapping picture frames and loading furniture. The apartment looked smaller with Jude's belongings gone, like a stage set being struck after the final performance. Sienna had made herself scarce for the move, staying with Olivia for the weekend. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter short. Apologetic, asking him to leave her art supplies and promising to collect them later. The note was signed Love S, which felt like muscle memory rather than actual emotion. "What are you going to do with these?" Marco asked, holding up a canvas. Sienna had abandoned, half-finished. It was a cityscape, all sharp angles and muted colors, beautiful but somehow lonely. There's a women's shelter in Brooklyn that takes art donations for their art therapy program. Jude wrapped the canvas carefully in newspaper. Might as well. Let someone get some use out of them. By Sunday evening, Jude was standing in his new studio apartment in the village smaller than the place he'd shared with Sienna, but entirely his. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen, windows that faced east toward the morning sun. It was the kind of place he'd always imagined living when he was younger, for he'd gotten caught up in the idea that happiness required more space, more stuff, more of everything. His phone buzzed with texts throughout the evening. Colleagues. From the party checking in, Delilah sending a photo of her own packing progress with the caption, "Freedom has never looked so much like cardboard boxes." Olivia, surprisingly, asking if he needed anything and apologizing again for not speaking up sooner. But the text that caught him off guard came from an unknown number. Saw the Times article. Brilliant approach. Would love to interview you for my podcast about modern relationships. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Times article. Jude had forgotten that one of the party guests was a lifestyle reporter. He found the piece online, The Divorce Party, when ending a marriage becomes an act of self-respect. It was thoughtful, well-written, focused more on the emotional intelligence of choosing dignity over drama than on the spectacle itself. The comment section was predictably mixed, half the readers calling them inspirational and half calling them attention-seeking narcissists. Jude read a few and then closed the browser. Other people's opinions felt irrelevant now, like criticism of a movie he'd already decided he enjoyed. Tuesday morning brought the official divorce filing. Jude met with his lawyer, a woman, Delilah, had recommended, who specialized in no-contest divorces and signed papers that felt both momentous and anticlimactic. "Clean break," the lawyer said, reviewing the documents. "No kids, minimal shared assets, both parties agreeing to irreconcilable differences. Should be finalized within 6 months. 6 months. After 8 years of marriage, 6 months to make it officially over seemed almost absurdly quick. But then again, the marriage had really ended months ago. This was just paperwork. That afternoon, Jude did something he hadn't done in years. He went to a bookstore. Not to buy something specific, not to meet anyone, just to wander among the stacks and remember what it felt like to have time for curiosity. He found himself in the poetry section, pulling down a volume of Mary Oliver. The poems felt like cool water after months in the desert, reminding him of the person he'd been before he'd gotten so caught up in trying to save something that was already lost. "Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" The words hit him like a gentle slap. What was he planning to do with his one wild and precious life? For so long, his answer had been, make Sienna happy, or keep the marriage together, or be the kind of husband who never gives up. But those weren't plans for his life. They were reactions to someone else's choices. He bought the book and walked home through Washington Square Park, watching families feed ducks and couples argue about dinner plans and students. Sprawled on benches with their laptops and books, life happening in all its messy, complicated, beautiful normalcy. His phone rang as he reached his building. Delilah's name on the screen. "How's the new place?" she asked. "Small, quiet. Mine." He unlocked his apartment door. "How's the divorce paperwork going?" "Filed this morning. Ezra's lawyer tried to drag it out, but when I pointed out that prolonging things would just mean more billable hours discussing his infidelity on the record, he suddenly became very cooperative. Efficient. I prefer practical. Listen, are you busy Friday night? Why? There's an art opening in Chelsea. New gallery, emerging artists, wine that's actually drinkable. I thought you might want to get out, see something beautiful that isn't connected to your ex-wife. Jude looked around his bare apartment, boxes still stacked against the walls, and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd gone to something just because it sounded interesting. I'd like that, he said. Good. It's a date. Well, not. A date, a friend date. The two people who've survived their marriages and want to look at art date. The best kind? After they hung up, Jude sat in his single chair, the only piece of furniture. He'd unpacked so far and felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Anticipation. Not the nervous kind that came from wondering what mood Sienna would be in when she got home, but the good kind. The kind that came from having something to look forward to that was entirely his choice. He opened the poetry book and read until the sun set over his new life. The gallery was tucked into a converted warehouse in Chelsea, the kind of space that made art feel vital and immediate rather than precious and untouchable. Jude arrived precisely on time-old habits, but found himself lingering outside for a moment, watching well-dressed people filter through the entrance with the easy confidence of those who belonged in such places. When had he stopped feeling like he belonged anywhere? Second thoughts? Delilah appeared beside him, elegant in a charcoal wool dress and a leather jacket that somehow managed to look both professional and rebellious. Just observing. Good observation is underrated. She linked her arm through his with casual warmth. Ready to go look at some art that nobody's ex-spouse had anything to do with? The gallery was crowded but not claustrophobic, filled with the kind of people who actually looked at the art rather than just networking around it. The pieces themselves were bold, contemporary large canvases in vivid colors that seemed to pulse with life. What do you think? Delilah asked, as they paused in front of a painting that appeared to be a cityscape dissolving into abstract color. I think it's the opposite of everything Sienna ever painted. Good opposite or bad opposite? Hopeful opposite. They moved through the space slowly, discussing the pieces with the kind of honest curiosity that had been missing from Jude's life for so long. Delilah had strong opinions about art. She preferred bold strokes to careful ones. Emotion to technique. Work that took risks over work that played it safe. Life's too short for timid art, she said, stopping in front of a sculpture that looked like it was mid-explosion. All sharp angles and defiant energy. Is that your philosophy about everything? Increasingly, yes. They were standing in front of a piece titled Exit Wounds, a series of photographs showing empty rooms with single objects left behind, a coffee cup on a windowsill, a book open on an unmade bed, a pair of shoes by a door. The images were haunting but not sad, suggesting presence rather than absence. That one speaks to you, Delilah observed, watching his face. It's about what remains after someone leaves. But it's not tragic, it's just honest, like divorce photography, like life photography. A server appeared with a tray of wine, and they each took a glass. The wine was actually good, crisp and clean. Nothing like the cheap stuff Jude had been drinking since the separation. Can I tell you something? Delilah said as they found a quieter corner of the gallery, of course. I haven't enjoyed an evening this much in years. Not the party that was satisfying, but this is different. This is actually fun. When did you stop having fun? Probably around the time I started thinking that being married meant being serious all the time, that happiness was frivolous, that pleasure was selfish. She sipped her wine thoughtfully. Ezra treated joy like it was something that had to be earned through suffering. It's like if you weren't miserable, you weren't working hard enough. Sienna was the opposite. She thought misery was authentic and happiness was fake. Like if you weren't tortured by something, you couldn't possibly be a real artist. God, we picked some winners, didn't we? They laughed, and the sound felt easy, natural. Around them, conversations about color theory and artistic vision created a pleasant buzz. The kind of background noise that made private conversations feel more intimate rather than less. What happens next? Jude asked, after the divorces. Our final, after we've both figured out how to be single people again? I don't know. For the first time in my adult life, I genuinely don't know what comes next, and it doesn't terrify me. That's either very healthy or very unhealthy. I'm choosing to believe it's healthy. They stayed until the gallery began to empty, talking about everything except their respective divorces. Books they'd read, places they wanted to travel, the difference between being alone and being lonely, the way certain pieces of music could transport you back to specific moments in time. When they finally walked outside, the spring evening had turned cooler, with the kind of crisp air that made the city feel full of possibility. "Thank you," Jude said as they reached the corner where they'd need to head in different directions. "For what?" "It's for reminding me that there are still things I want to do, places I want to go, conversations I want to have. Thank you for reminding me that not everyone thinks emotional intelligence is a character flaw." She kissed his cheek again, the same gesture from the night of the party, but it felt different now. It's less like goodbye and more like see you soon. "Call me this week," she said. "I will." Jude walked home through the village, past couples, arguing about restaurant choices and students, stumbling out of bars and elderly men playing chess in the park, even though it was almost 10 o'clock. The city felt alive around him, full of people making choices and taking chances and figuring things out as they went. His apartment, when he reached it, no longer felt empty. It felt potential. Like a blank canvas waiting for him to decide what kind of life he wanted to paint on it. He made tea and sat by the window, looking out at the street where people were living their own complicated, messy, beautiful lives. For the first time in months, he felt like he was living his too. 6 months later, Jude woke up in his apartment, to sunlight streaming through windows he'd forgotten to cover with curtains. The space had evolved slowly, organically, bookshelves filled with volumes he'd actually chosen, plants that thrived in the eastern light, photographs of places he'd been and places he wanted to go. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier with the anticlimactic efficiency of bureaucracy. Papers signed, assets divided, 8 years reduced to a manila folder in his filing cabinet. Sienna had moved to Portland with Ezra, who'd left his own wife and his real estate business to pursue something more authentic. The last Jude had heard, they were running an art gallery together and posting earnest Instagram photos about finding their true selves. He felt nothing about it. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even curiosity. Their lives had become irrelevant to his, which felt like the healthiest possible outcome. His phone buzzed with a text from Delilah. "Coffee? I have news." They met at their usual place, a small cafe in the village that served excellent espresso and minded its own business. Delilah looked radiant, more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. The sharp edges of her lawyer persona had softened into something warmer, more accessible. "So," she said, settling into her chair with the kind of satisfied energy that suggested, "Good news? I'm taking a sabbatical from the firm. It's from the law. Maybe permanently." Shh. She stirred her coffee slowly. "I've been offered a position with Doctors Without Borders, general counsel for their international operations. It would mean traveling, living in places where legal work actually matters in life or death ways. That's incredible. Are you going?" "To take it? I already said yes." "When do you leave?" 2 months. It's just enough time to train my replacement and figure out what to do with my penthouse." Jude felt something complicated in his chest, pride in her courage, excitement for her adventure, and something that might have been disappointment. Over the past months, their friendship had become one of the most genuine relationships in his life. The thought of losing that felt like a small grief. "You'll be amazing at it," he said, and meant it. "What about you?" "Any major life changes?" "On the horizon? Actually, yes." Pulled out a letter that had arrived the day before. "Remember that podcast interview I did about the divorce party? The one that got picked up by all those relationship websites? The one that made you briefly internet famous for revolutionizing how we think about ending marriages? That one. Well, apparently it caught the attention of a literary agent. She thinks there's a book in it, not a memoir exactly, but something about choosing dignity over drama when relationships end. Are you going to write it?" "I'm going to try. Been writing again anyway, just for myself. Turns out I have things to say that aren't about spreadsheets and quarterly reports. That's wonderful. Really wonderful." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up around them. Spring had given way to early summer, and everything felt alive, growing, changing. "Can I ask you something?" Delilah said finally. "Anything? Do you ever miss it?" "Being married, I mean." "Not Sienna specifically, but the idea of having someone who's supposed to be your person." Jude considered the question. "I miss the idea of having a person, but I don't miss having the wrong person. And I think maybe I needed to learn how to be my own person before I could be anyone else's person." Again, very wise, very therapeutic. "I've been seeing a counselor, I mean, working through some things, good things, or difficult things. Both. Mostly figuring out why I thought loving someone meant disappearing myself. Why I confused being supportive with being invisible." Delilah nodded. "I've been doing some of that work too. Turns out there's a difference between being strong and being a martyr." "Who knew?" They laughed, the kind of easy laughter that comes from shared understanding. Around them, the cafe filled with the morning rush people grabbing coffee before work. Students with laptops, retirees reading newspapers and solving the world's problems over scones. "I'm going to miss this," Delilah said. "These conversations, this friendship, it doesn't have to end just because you're leaving the country, I know, but it'll be different. Different doesn't have to mean worse. Look at you being all wise and philosophical. I've had good teachers." A month later, Jude stood in his apartment, now fully decorated. It's fully lived in, fully his reading the first chapter of what would eventually become his book. The writing was coming easier than he'd expected, words flowing from a place of clarity rather than pain. His phone rang. Delilah, calling from Geneva, where she was in training for her new position. "How's Switzerland?" he asked. "Absurdly beautiful and surprisingly challenging." "How's the book?" "Surprisingly therapeutic and absurdly difficult." The best things usually are. They talked for an hour about her training, his writing, the strange pleasure of building a life from scratch, instead of trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken. When they finally hung up, Jude felt the particular satisfaction that comes from friendship that transcends geography. That evening, he walked through Washington Square Park, watching the eternal chess games and street musicians and NYU students sprawled on blankets with their books and their dreams. He'd brought his notebook, thinking he might write, but instead he just sat and observed. A young couple nearby was having the kind of intense, whispered argument that suggested a relationship at a crossroads. The woman was crying quietly. The man looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Jude found himself hoping they'd figure it out, not by staying together necessarily, but by choosing whatever path led to their most authentic selves. His phone buzzed with a text from Marco. "Dinner tomorrow? New girl I'm seeing wants to meet the famous divorce party guy?" Jude smiled and typed back, "Sure, but I prefer authentically single guy now. Even better." As the sun set over the park, Jude opened his notebook and wrote, "Sometimes the end of something is the beginning of everything else. Sometimes you have to stop being who you thought you were supposed to be in order to become who you actually are. Sometimes peace isn't something that happens to you, it's something you choose. Every day, in small acts of self-respect and large acts of courage." He looked up at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness, at the people around him living their own complicated, beautiful lives, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Contentment, not happiness. Exactly that. It was too simple, too fleeting, but contentment. The deep satisfaction of knowing that his life, finally, was entirely his own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.